All right. How you doing? I am well. How are you?
Good.
All right. Well, everyone, welcome to The Harvest, episode 16.
Yeah.
We did it.
We're doing it.
Yes. Welcome to The Harvest, where we discuss everything cinema and story. And as we learn, you learn. As we grow, you grow. I am Xavier Garcia.
And I'm Jonathan Garcia.
Now, we are here. We have arrived. This is part 3 of our 3-part series on killing your darlings in the creation of story.
Yeah.
So when a movie is made, a story is written and rewritten 3 times. And in each of those times, darlings are formed. So we engaged a 3-part journey to discuss darlings in all 3 phases of story creation: the writing, the production, the filming, and the editing.
Right.
And this week's episode, we focused on the 3rd phase of rewriting the story, post-production, the editing. Woo!
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to kill this.
Let's kill this 3-part. Let's kill part number 3, the whole thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first, let's start with a quick refresher, because I want us all to be on the same page as far as what darlings are. So I'm going to give you the definition that we've been using consistently throughout all 3 of these episodes. What are darlings? In the writing process, darlings are words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and even chapters or whole scenes that we, the writer, are often the most proud of. In the filming process, darlings could be, complicated camera moves, intricate blocking, rare props, or elaborate scene setups that you planned and plotted out and you're totally in love with.
Right.
And in the edit process, darlings can be unique shot sequences or heavily edited takes or perhaps B-roll footage that's just magnificently filmed, or, we talked about, for animators, for example, certain background animations or even foreground animations that took hours and hours long to create, the intricacies of movement and shadow and light. And these things, because they take so long, they're just near and dear to us, and they're special. We love these darlings.
Right.
To the point where we almost don't care if those darlings are clear to our audience or not. We love them and we want to keep them. The problem is they can perhaps become distractions or even be unnecessary weights burdening your story, and they must be killed.
Yeah, and I'll even add a little something to that little bit you just put in. Darlings disconnect us from our audiences.
Yeah, they definitely do. Oftentimes they can be jarring.
Yeah.
Like, what is this here for? Yeah.
Right.
And in disconnecting, you kind of create this dissonance and this awareness, almost like, I'm watching a movie, as opposed to getting lost in the story.
Right. And that's when you start to realize, you start looking at the movie as a piece of work, and you start assessing whether it's good or bad instead of being lost in the movie.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem. Because the moment that, and we're not talking about breaking the 4th wall. No. Because there's a successful in it, and there's also an unsuccessful way of breaking the 4th wall. When you break the 4th wall, like, for example, a character will come and address the audience directly.
Sure. The Office. Great example.
Perfect example. That you're still involved and engaged in the story. You're still following the story because the writer has put that in, and it's fluid, and it's a part of the story. The character is supposed to be doing that. However, a darling, what it does is oftentimes it just doesn't fit into the narrative flow, nor may it perhaps fit into the visual flow. And when you see it, you're like, it stands out. It stands out, and it makes you think a little more than what you should.
Right.
It should kind of just, filter into the flow of what you're watching. So, and you become aware of the story.
There's a good movie, The Revenant, where it's... You touched upon it, a great example, not just of The Office, but at the end of that movie, Leonardo's character stares right at the camera. And he peeks right at the camera as a way of pulling the audience and saying, look at this situation, look at me, look at the result, what do you think about it? It's very powerful, and it's purposeful, but it's at the end of the movie. Yeah. It's like as if it's closing with him staring at you and you guys connecting with the audience.
Yeah.
And so those are different things that you bring in, and you have to think about what they do. You don't want to lose your audience. You want to bring in your audience. These are things that you want to think about when you're doing it.
So that's not necessarily a darling, as you're saying.
Right.
Like, because what a darling does is the exact opposite. It doesn't bring you in. It almost jars you out. Right. Nevertheless, both of them are equally near and dear to whether it's the writer, the director, or the editor, because these are oftentimes personal creative choices that we make that are emotionally connected to us, maybe not our audience, but to us, and we just need to check ourselves and know, does this belong in the story or does it not?
Right.
So let's talk about the editing process, because week 1 we talked about writing and darlings that are created in writing. Week 2 we talked about filming and in the production, and primarily, the director's responsibility to killing darlings. And now we're going to talk about the editor and editing, or maybe not just the editor specifically, but the edit process and the darlings that are created during editing. So if you could summarize what darlings are in the editing process, let's talk about some examples.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have the VFX moments of editing, the comprehensive editing. Yeah. We got the blocking, and I know that's a lot of what the director does on set. Yep. Which is huge.
Like the choreography of characters within the space and how they interact, whether it be with props, with set, or with other characters, is called blocking. And usually what happens is that a director will come and working with the DP, walk the actors through and rehearse the actors through the set so that they know where either their camera points are, like their focal points are, or just, how the characters are supposed to kind of flow through the scene in order to tell the story of the scene. So those are all choreography and blocking points that can become darlings. They can become darlings. Yeah. Go on, continue.
No, there's quite a few. There's also like within the editing phase, you have the color correction. You have trying to figure out, the grading, things that you've thought out in the beginning processes where you start executing them, and then you're realizing that the lighting does not suit that color grade you had in mind.
Yeah. And we had a similar situation where we made an artistic choice in A Blood Throne, where we kind of broke our color identity. Mm-hmm. And, we had established a very specific and unique color identity for the fullness of the film, and then we hit a very emotional moment where we scripted this into it. We talked about it, and it was during the editing phase where we made the final decision to actually move forward with it. Mm-hmm. It had been something that we had discussed during the writing. It wasn't really written into it, and it was something that when we shot, we knew it was going to be an emotional moment, but it was in the editing when we were color grading where we were like, okay, at the death of the king, where the son, Antipas, is staring into his dying father's eyes, we need to completely break all the rules that we've had established for color identity and fade this thing into a red. Yeah. And there was a purpose for that. Yeah. Now, we grew emotionally attached to it. We were really excited about it. It took us time to perfect the gradient. And do we want to have, for example, have the flashbacks also resemble the red? Do we want, like, a lot of this stuff was talked about. It took a lot of time, and it could have become a darling if we had then spoken to the team at large and we couldn't justify that. If we had not been able to justify the reason, and if visually it didn't make sense and it didn't lend to the emotional state of what is happening in the story, it could have been a darling where we were so connected to it, where our producers are saying, get it out, but we're like, no, we worked really hard on it. Right. But the fact that we checked and balanced off of each other as editors, we knew that we were moving into it sober-mindedly, that it wasn't emotional, but that it was purposeful and artistic, and it was a choice that was ingrained into the story.
Yeah, a lot of times you have to discuss your darlings with a business partner to figure out whether it's a darling or not, so that they can kind of critique the technique or whatever it is, to be like, oh no, this says so much, you need to add it, or this takes away from what you want to say.
Yeah, and we're going to get heavy into that in one of our topics later on in the episode, which I'm excited that you brought out, because we're teasing some of the really good stuff that we're going to be talking about, the team that you're supposed to surround yourself with. Another editing darling could be like complicated animation or CGI.
Right.
You know, and we talked about this in the last two episodes, but something that we find that happens a lot is, you know, and you've, you know, we've had some conversations with some of our creatives, you know, the him VFX group, when they're designing some of the CGI or some of the animation for the films that we're working on. They spend hours on some of these set extensions, right? And as they're like pouring in days and nights and days and nights into these elaborate architectural pieces of like just art, and then we say, oh, because it's a night scene, this whole thing is going to play in the shadows, so you're not even going to see part of it. It could be like for the creator, like, what are you kidding me? Like and it could become a darling. And if the animator has a very powerful say and a very strong say in that group and says, no, we're going to play this in bright light, it could ruin the story.
Absolutely. It could be distracting. It could take away, all these elements can take away from the foreground and the main shot. You have to be able, and one of the things that you and I do is we do enjoy creating scenes in the foreground, midground, and the background. We love to explore our environment. However, there is always one area that has the power, has the attention, has the eye, and the rest follow. It's like kind of like you know, the icing on the cake. The rest is, but the cake is that main shot, whether it's the face of the actor or the insert of whatever it is that they're trying to say.
Yeah, and it can play at any point in the depth of the shot. It could be the foreground, it could be the midground, or it could be the background.
Exactly.
And if there's a darling in any other area pulling away from that, you're killing your story.
And most of the time, it's, you know, those CGI shots. It's like, you know, this needs to be there because look how beautiful it is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's like this like I just recreated 1850s New Bedford. Like, you gotta show it in its all splendor and glory. It's like, but that's not the story. That's just a little bit of icing that's supposed to be a part of this other beautiful cake.
And Blade Runner 2049 did a lot of that. I know a lot of other movies, but the one that comes to my head right now is Blade Runner 2049, the most recent one, where they created this expanse. CGI background, and then it's like, boom, you can't even see it.
It's all played in dark.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because if for those of you that listen to the Team Deacons podcast, he talks about his work with Denis in 2049 and how oftentimes some of those difficult decisions of these worlds that they created then being played in the shadows, because that's something about Roger Deakins that's unique in that he loves silhouette. And he loves those shots. And so imagine, you know, like being an actor and having gone through this powerful performance, or being an animator and having put this powerful visual, and then it being like, that's not the focus. You're not the focus. We're working together to tell a different story.
It's so hard for a crew member or an actor to be like, oh, this is my part, and then be like, what is it? What happened?
I see your finger. I see your arm. It's like, oh, dude, you had an awesome back of your head.
It's so discouraging, but it's the story is
king.
So it's we've done it a lot. I mean, we have an awesome scene, which has to do with the color grading part, where we're like, we want to do this blue because it's in prison. We wanted to make it cold. He's been in there for a long time. He's coming in with a torch. He's coming in from the outside. The king is warmth, so warmth follows him. He's alive while the other guy is dead in the prison. And there's, you know, he's bloody, he's swinging, it's a powerful scene, and then the movie in the theater goes on, and then it's like, where's the scene? You know, and our uncle's in that movie, and he killed I mean, he did such an awesome job, but it's like, we had to get rid. It's gone.
I'm sorry, but we had to make that tough
decision.
We
love you.
But so let me give a little bit of context, because this is an example of killing a darling. The film was a Blood Throne, and when we first wrote and conceptualized the Blood Throne, it was supposed to be a very, very long short film, almost approaching kind of like a pilot TV series. It was almost at the 55-minute mark, hour-long mark. But when we finished filming, after having done our darling killing during the writing phase, it turned out to being 48. And then we filmed 48 minutes, but then during the editing phase, we did a little bit more darling killing, and it ended up being 38. Now, one of the major scenes that got cut that Jonathan just referenced was the scene between King Herod killing his eldest son.
Yeah, historically.
And which is a historically accurate moment where he, we showed that, I think he was historically, I think he was drowned to death, and we said that he was strangled to death in this one. And it's a similar type of death, but the drowning for us, it's whole nother story. Yeah. We didn't want to get into the visuals of, like the pseudo baptism and things like that, because we were playing things in water, and we was just like, let's get away from the drowning, and let's do it, in a prison. Beautiful prison. We our scout team, when we scouted for this prison, it was an authentic recreation of an ancient prison, and it was this beautiful location. We got the licenses to get in there. It was a lot of work to get in, but we did it. Then finally getting in, the setting up of the scene, the setting up of the moment took forever. The shot lists took forever, but they were perfect for that scene. The lighting was perfect for that scene. The makeup was extensive for that scene, because all the makeup that was on our uncle, who's an artist. He himself is actually an artist. He's a sculptor and he's a painter, a muralist. And he had the small role in it. And he was like head to toe just covered in prosthetics and in blood and in like his vomit, that was made out of like cereal and all crazy stuff. And it took like, I think maybe 2.5 hours to put on all this makeup. And so here you're hearing us establishing and setting up why this can become a darling, because so much went into it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we had it smoked up, fogged up. We had 2 cameras ready to go. Our A unit and B unit were there because we were like, we're going to play this straight through. We wanted to have that theater feel because we wanted the 2 characters to play off each other. So we were going to do continuous filming. And we did it, and it was perfect. And we watched it, and we edited into the sequence, and we looked at each other, and we go, is this a darling? And we're like, yeah.
Yeah. And it had nothing to do with the fact that it was a bad scene, poorly shot, poorly acted.
None of that.
It had nothing to do with that, and everything to do with making sure that the story could bridge smoothly and tell the story clearly the way we wanted to.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. And the scene itself could have been a short film by itself.
Which we should probably at some point consider releasing it, right?
And but it's like, you have to wrestle. You have to wrestle with yourself, and pull out the best.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was. Yeah.
And
it's family member too. So it's
I know.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so he watched it. We're in theaters. We're doing a premiere.
But he's an artist, so he
understands. Right.
That's the beautiful thing about it. He understood it. He says, "Yeah, I'm fine. I get it."
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what happened when he went home.
Immediately at first, you're like, "What? Where am I?" Yeah. I'm just a tiny little piece in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because we did use it. We still, even though it was cut, we used it to kind of establish and set up the tone of the film.
Yeah.
So it opens up with this real quick murder. And all of a sudden the film opens up and you're like, whoa, what did I just walk into?
Right.
And so it got used. It just didn't get used how we had originally scripted it. And so that happens in the darling killing process. It's just something that is inevitable, and it's important for you to be sober-minded enough, removed from ego enough, and objective enough to be able to make kind of those hard calls, when you're cutting.
Yeah.
Another example was also in that same movie, A Blood Throne, the drone shot.
Yeah, right.
What happened with the drone shot?
Well,
a couple of drone shots, but primarily the closing ones.
Yeah, so we had a beautiful scenery.
All the scenery. Our set locations for that whole film was phenomenal.
A friend of ours,
a drone pilot,
licensed
come
drone
in
pilot. and say, hey, I want to be involved in this. I believe in this, and I want to offer my services. And we're like, oh, awesome, praise God. And there was another friend of ours from a church that said, use my place. I believe in this. The view was just gorgeous up on a hill. This isolated home, beautiful home.
Yeah, up in Waterloo, Maine.
And sun is setting over the mountains.
Yeah.
We got this drone flying through, panning up, and we're just enjoying.
And it's flying through the sunset. You've got we've got donkeys up on that mountain, and Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus, they're all up there. And we've got this giant fire, and this drone is just flying right through it.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is going to be the most amazing closing shot of the film of all time.
Yeah. And then, we're assessing, breaking down shots, and we're just just thinking, the drone shot.
Yeah.
You know?
And just to give a little bit of context, that we set up, like, that shot was half of the day just to get that right. I mean, I think we were setting up that shot for maybe about 3 hours.
Yeah.
And we had very limited time because that was supposed to be the sunset. So we had the magic hour, shot. Mm-hmm. So, sorry, continue.
Yeah, and so when we took a look at the shot, there was a disconnect between the imagery of what was shot versus what we took with our cameras.
Yeah.
And something that you have to evaluate, and the drone was a high-end drone. It wasn't like a GoPro,
right.
But the shot wasn't good enough establishing shot for the scenery.
Right.
And you have to look at your content and say, also, is this good enough to put in?
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll have to make those decisions to, to be able to move forward, and then you're like, well, I don't have enough footage. You deal with that. You have to find ways. You challenge yourself again. Find ways to be able to tell the story. If something doesn't look good, don't put it in just because you worked hard on it and you were emotionally connected. Exactly. There are different things that you can do. You can find establishing shots of things that may look like it off 4K stock footage that might work.
I mean, fortunately, we had the wherewithal to get all of our coverage.
Yeah.
And so because we had coverage, losing that shot wasn't going to kill us. Mm-hmm. It may not have been like the initial artistic intent that we had, but we had our coverage, so we could edit our film. Yeah. So here's a tip, make sure, for example, if you're unsure and you're working with your DP and you're coming up with a shot list, if you're a first-time director, like, put together a shot list that includes coverage. Don't just throw coverage out the window and say, no, I'm going all in for this one shot, because you could get in trouble, and so I personally, I know that I'm not quite there yet to say throw coverage out the window. We don't need coverage. We're just going to go with the epic shot, and that's all we're going to get that day of filming, because
which is impressive for you to say, because the last film that we did,
Underground, we do that.
We were just kind of like,
we threw coverage out the window.
Boom, boom. Yeah, let's get in and get out. I was like, whoa, all right, let's do it.
Yeah, that was bold.
Yeah, but I mean, it was exactly what we needed, and I think that when you start learning your style, and also when you're able to wrestle with your darlings, you will slowly morph into a person who is able to know exactly what they want and get in and get out.
Yeah. So we just talked about a darling that was an entire scene. We talked about a darling that was a specific shot. Now, another example of a darling for blocking. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember in Underground how long we had worked with the drunken sailor that gets shot at the end of Underground. So that was actually, it was a kind of a last minute actor shift. The actor that was supposed to do that part got put into another role, and so it vacated that role, and one of our crew members, who is a great actor, was like, you know what, like, I'm not going to be used during that scene, so let me jump in, I'll do it. And so we choreographed it, we rehearsed it, we blocked it out, and we had and we had specific shots that were set up for that blocking, and we covered it, and it looked great and it looked good. And then in editing, we then realized that the blocking was excessive, that there was just too much movement, and it was messing with, I guess, the story that we're trying to tell, because it was supposed to be a subtle moment where the important individual was the character played by Pridemore, Bull. He was supposed to be the one that was calculated and specific and strategic, and he was going to turn and shoot. But if we had shown this shot of this drunken sailor and all this blocking, it was going to almost pull away. It was going to pull from where the attention needed to be. Right. And that was a choice. That was a conscious choice in the editing that we decided, you know what, let's pull back, from this actor's blocking and movement.
It gave a character too much value that was unnecessary. And that's one of the things you have to say. Like, the moment you start putting camera on a person, they're important. You have to ask yourself, how important is this person? And we're like, no, the important and focus is on Pridemore's character. He's got to be, fully in control of this scene. The scene revolves around him, and if I'm leaving a shot to go to somewhere else, then I've already said to the people watching the movie, watch this over here because this is important, when it's really not.
Right, and no discredit to David Pridemore because he was genuinely controlling that moment.
Yeah.
You know, he was a very powerful actor in that film, in that he was, I mean, I feel like that role was made for him. You know, he has the style, he has the swagger for that bull character. And so he was controlling the moment. It's just stylistically, as editors, you know, now Mount Harvest and him getting involved in this process. And, you know, we're looking at the scene and we're trying to tell something that's beyond just what the actors are doing. You know, the actors are communicating, but as an editor, you have the power to add value and emphasis in certain areas. And what we wanted to was overload the emphasis in a specific area because we wanted the audience to be emotionally overloaded with what was about to happen.
Right, and speaking of emotionally overloaded, another aspect of Darlings that need to be, you know, killed is sound.
Ooh, yes.
Sound is a huge source of emotion.
Yes.
And you have to find out whether it's too excessive and people are noticing that you're forcing them to feel a certain way. And we did just that in Underground, where there's a powerful scene between Tommy and Arissa's character where they're going at it and they're just letting it all out. And some movies would climax the music and go, run, and bring the passion along with the sound. And, you know, in this moment, we looked at it and we said, this is very raw.
Yeah.
This is very real. Yeah. This is a real argument.
Yeah.
And when you are in some home and you're watching two people argue, you sit there, there's no music.
Yeah.
You feel it.
This beautiful car crash
you
happening
feel
before
it,
you, and you're just like,
and you're like, don't touch it, you're gonna break it, don't touch it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we did. We're like, you know, and we told our composer, we're gonna pull it back here.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, and that was I had to kind of swallow my pride in that moment because I originally, you know, speaking to the composer, I had walked him through saying, let's swell this moment.
This is what we want. And we didn't know until we're looking at this content edited together, really, to be like, hey, you know, actually, let's hold back.
Yeah, because he delivered exactly what we asked for perfectly. But then I had to kind of swallow my pride and be like, man, I misled this. And as a director, I had to make the hard decision of saying, like, all of that work, we got to cut it.
Yeah.
Because exactly everything that you said. And I think it was you, actually, that had looked at it and you were like, bro, like, this is a very real moment. All of the emotion is there. Adding music is only going to distract the audience from what is happening between those two individuals. And it happens in the movie Marriage Story a couple of times too. When they're getting in the heat of the argument, the sound kind of pulls back and it allows you to just kind of fall into it. And that's something similar to what we did in Underground.
That's awesome.
So yeah. So those are some examples. Those are pretty solid examples of in the editing process how Darlings can be created. And these are really emotionally draining events, emotionally draining edits, you know, and as a result of working them over and over and over again and working them out over the course of time, and finally, you know, you conquer them. You're like, we finally put this edit in. They take up a very special place in our subconscious, and we then can't objectively view them in light of the larger story, the story at large. And it's a weird subconscious phenomenon that happens. And they go from an edit, you know, to like your living, breathing child. You know, it's like that's what a darling is. That's why it's also known as, you know, instead of killing your darlings, it's also known as killing your babies.
Right.
You know, and so because it becomes like a child, and you're like, you're like, you know, mother bear. Like anybody tries to get near, you're like, get away.
You know, it's funny. I just moved. I just bought a house and moved.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And one of the hardest things to do is to throw away things that like you love so much.
Yeah.
And, during the moving process, I got this pile over here. I was like, yeah, I'm going to take all this stuff over here. I'm going to bring it. I'm going to give it to so-and-so. I'm going to give this.
Donate,
I'm going to get rid of this. Or I'm going to keep this. I'm going to put this over here. And then when you've come to, like, the end of, like, this whole moving process and you still see these things in your old home and you're like, what am I going to do with these things? You have to assess and be like, is it worth bringing to the new home? That's what I asked myself. Is it worth it? Is it going to make my home better? Or can I get other things? Can I find new solutions? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I was just like,
is this a part of the new chapter of your life?
Exactly.
Is this a new part of your new design?
Exactly.
Is this a new part of your new life? Because you change home, the layout is different, so your living room is different. Is this my new living room?
Exactly.
Is this how it will be represented?
Exactly. And, I left the house and I look back, everything's in the trash.
That's
what it was at the end of the day. It was all just in the trash.
Yeah.
And so
there was a lot of darling killing that weekend.
Yeah, there was. So, if you haven't really understood what darling is by this point,
move.
Yeah.
Then you'll know.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you'll know. You'll know what a darling is. You'll know exactly what it is.
Right, you'll feel it.
So, let's move on to our next topic.
Yeah.
How to avoid darlings in post-production. There are certain things that you can actually do, and this will speak more so to indie filmmakers. This next section is more so for independent filmmakers because in the independent filmmaking world, a lot of positions, for example, are turned into one. Like you may have an entire post-production team, you may have an editor, an assistant editor, you may have like an ADR, sound recorder, but then you also have a sound engineer, and then you have a sound mixer. Those may become one.
The camera guys, the first AC at the same time.
Right, those things become one in the independent film world. And so what we're going to talk about in the next couple of bullet points really speak to the indie world, to that world where it's a lot all hands on deck. You kind of find a way to make it and get it done. It isn't necessarily money that's buying your way through problems. It's outside the box thinking, strategic, type of, well, we don't have the money for it, so how do we get it done? So like one of the first approaches, one of the first things that we can do in order to avoid darlings in post-production is to hire a post-production supervisor. Now, not every production has the ability to do that financially, but maybe finding a friend or someone that can keep the post-production on track from a budgetary perspective and timeline. Because sometimes darlings are created when you've got too much time, or you're completely disregarding time and you're saying, no, I'm just going to take my time editing this. But if you've got someone saying we don't have that kind of time, so now you're being pulled away from like these darlings being created because you have to be focused and strategic and specific about your edits. And it can't just be edits for the sake of emotional attachment. They have to be edits for the sake of story. And so when you have a post-production supervisor, he's going to help a producer achieve as much of the edit process as possible without going over budget or without going over time. And on films, for example, that involve like super heavy VFX or CGI, computer generated images, they make sure that the post-production supervisors will make sure that the producers are aware of all of the creative and financial considerations that post-production has before work on the film even begins. And they're kind of a source of checks and balances, and they help you stay organized so that you're not derailing into this place of let me tinker, let me play. You don't have time to tinker and play when you've got somebody there that's holding you accountable to staying on time and staying on budget. And so finding someone other than yourself, it can't be yourself, because if it's yourself, you're going to excuse yourself all the time. Right? It's like, oh, I got a little more time. Oh, I could do it.
Right.
It's got to be someone else that's going to hold you accountable to the budget, if there is one. And there's always a budget. Even if it's zero budget, there's always a budget.
Yeah.
We talked about that in one of our podcasts. Or time and the deliverable, that end date that can hold you accountable, because if you don't have that person, you're going to fall into, I'm going to play with this a little bit more than what you actually should.
Yeah. And to go even deeper into that, time could be even split up. We know time is work. And when you deal with that, you split it up into these two scenarios. Work can consist of skill and passion.
Yeah.
And, And when you have someone who's skillful at it, time could be cut back.
Yeah.
So when you're hiring someone, you want to think about skill.
Yeah.
You want to think about passion.
Yeah.
Because passion will shorten time.
Yeah.
You know, and so you have to evaluate, you know, when you're going into these post-production editing phases, you have to see time in that fashion. Skill and passion.
Yeah.
You know, are you bringing in someone who's involved, who's skillful and also is passionate, then you're going to be able to have a smooth turnaround and not waste in adding more or taking away.
And I'm so glad you brought up passion, because it's so important on so many levels, because a passionate, skillful artist also brings good ideas.
Yeah.
Because they're passionate about the product. And because they're passionate, they're bringing ideas that are going to challenge your ideas. And a little bit of conflict is okay. A little bit of, you know, back and forth dialogue of two passionate people trying to get at the perfect solution is okay. And that's why skill and passion are super important.
I love it.
Glad you brought that up.
And it's basically like the scripture says, iron sharpens iron.
Yes.
You know, you're sharpening that sword.
You guys are sharpening each other.
You're making it nice, and you know, that thing's gonna cut and do its job.
Yeah. It can't be, you know, mud sharpening iron. It has to be another iron sharpening an iron. And I love that. Now, another thing that you can do in order to avoid darlings is, well, this one's pretty obvious, but sometimes people don't, you know, like, don't think that it's obvious, but it's obvious. Like, hire an editor. Now, oftentimes with our productions, you know, I direct and edit. Is that the best way to go about it? Sometimes, most times, no. The good thing about our situation is that I'm not cutting by myself, I'm cutting with you. And so I'm not just the editor, we're kind of editing as the Garcia brothers, and so there is always going to be that left brain, right brain checks and balances situation going on. For directors or filmmakers that don't have this our kind of setup, you know, get someone outside of yourself to edit your film for you. It doesn't mean that you're releasing, you know, creativity and you're releasing you know, the vision and the final product, but when you have an editor and a cutter, they are going to bring their unique ideas, because the editor is the most important crew member in the entirety of the production outside of the writer and the director, because the editor is the last person that has hands-on influence on the story. Right? And if you've got the writer, you've got the director, and you've got the editor working together at that last phase, now you've got some pretty solid checks and balances working into the final push for what this story can be.
I say a good editor is also a good screenwriter, because in a sense, they're piecing the story together visually from the person
it's different
who
because
is
it's visual, absolutely.
writing it,
Right.
you know? So you have to think about it, you know, if you are a screenwriter and you're a passionate editor, you know, like, that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. If you're a writer, you know, there are plenty of free programs out there for you to begin tinkering around and learning some post-production software and making yourself more marketable. Because imagine having a writer and editor. Although that could get tricky, because, you know, the writer, they write the product, then the director changes it, and then the editor, if he's the writer, is like, no, we're going back to my original.
Yeah,
but that could be too much power.
Right, but they understand story, so when the editor's articulating the story, they can see, that's exactly what it's saying here.
Yeah, that would be an interesting dynamic. I've yet to see that. That would be an interesting dynamic. A writer coming in and redoing everything that the director undid because he's the editor.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. But yeah, you know, a film editor has to be both a builder and a mechanic.
Yeah, right.
He has to build this thing because, you know, why a builder? Well, it's a whole bunch of different parts coming together. It's visual from the director and the DP. It's audio from, you know, the boom operator and the mixer. It's you know, it's VFX. It's titles. It's all of these different components that the editor then has to build to make a story. But he also has to be a mechanic because he has to fix broken parts.
Yeah.
And the fixing of the broken parts and in the building is where you discover the darlings.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing things as an editor where you're like, oh, I see what the initial intent is, but now once you've got the scenes back to back to back to back, and they're actually playing in real time, and you're viewing it and you're seeing it, you're realizing it didn't work the same way when executed as it did on paper. And sometimes that happens. You know, we put things down on paper and we think it's going to work beautifully because our imagination works in so many, myriad of directions all at the same time. But then when you hone that down and you put it down into the, the singular timeline and you're watching it, it just doesn't play the same. And sometimes you discover, what we initially intended to doing with the writing isn't going to work once you're actually visually seeing it.
Yeah.
And the editor discovers these things, and now you're cutting out stuff. And that's when, darlings are being shaved off. Maybe even potential entire scenes are being cut out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that one can do in order to avoid darlings is to rely on your team.
Right.
Rely on your team. Your team is your checks and balances. Okay?
Yeah, that's huge because a lot of times, I know that one of the films that we're writing right now, we're in a position where we're saying, is this something that I'm going to go on board as a DP? Am I going to be and really sitting back and realizing who is going to be able to tell this story the best?
Yeah.
This person or that person. Yeah. And you have to start thinking of these things, get yourself out of it because you want to take the shot, because you want to edit this thing and put it all together. But, a team is so important, and trusting your product in someone else's hand is going to only make it better.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. I mean, and who does that team begin with? Who's that top person? It's the producer.
Yeah, the producer. Right.
And the producer is so important in this process because the producer is building this team. Mm-hmm. The producer is building this team, and I think the producer has such a difficult job. He or she has to consciously put together like-minded individuals that are bought into this final product, this story, this movie, this theater play, this performance, whatever it is. The team that's being built has to be like-minded individuals because it's in that synergy of people that are all passionate and skillful, where you are going to and remember, everybody has to have the same goal. And if everybody has the same goal, you're all working together, checks and balances, to cut out the fat, to trim off the darlings, to kill the babies, and put together the purest, most elegant story.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah.
Because and a producer, the producer is super important for many other reasons. Obviously, I mean, like, they're ensuring the excellence is there. They're looking at budget. They're wondering, is this thing marketable? Is this going to please, the executive producers? But the producer, relying on your producer is super important too. If you're a filmmaker and you have a producer, to be able to rely on your producer, if he or she is a good producer, is phenomenal, because they're looking at this film with a bird's eye view. They're looking at it, removed, and they have to.
Yeah.
They have to, because they have to please so many departments, so many people. They have to work with executives and studios, again, for studio films, but executives, donors. If you did an Indiegogo or a GoFundMe and you made certain promises, they gotta follow up with those promises. Right. And this producer is going to look at the things that you're emotionally connected to, and with a bird's eye view, he's going to say, look, you love this because you're emotionally connected to it, but if we're trying to tell a good story and we're trying to please our executive producers and the people that pumped and funneled money into this is what needs to get cut. And being able to rely on a producer is super important.
Yeah. A lot of times, these executive producers, they were sold on the footage, on the script. They were sold on the script, but you have to remember, they could have read it and had a specific perspective and vision.
Well, they bring a vision to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, they bring their own vision to it.
And so that's why a lot of times you'll see these executive producers and producers working together be like, this is the type of director we want because we can see him do it in this way. And so that's when certain specific individuals come into play, who to hire, who to bring in, because I envision it to be done with this type of actor versus this type of actor. And that's, that's where you start getting very specific to make sure that, you get the story that you want done.
Yeah, and the producer is going to, having a producer that you can trust working with you is going to be an individual that is going to challenge you to check your heart, check your heart during the filmmaking process, to ensure that it's not just the best film for you,
right,
but it's the best film for your audience.
Right.
For the public, for your target, and whom the story is being told to. And that's super important. and other team members.
Right.
You know, like your cinematographer.
Right.
You know, if you're able to rely on your cinematographer and be able to connect with your cinematographer on a level beyond just professional, like do your job and get the get the images. No, but like a cinematographer also brings their view, their passion, and their skill.
Right.
They bring both
you think
of
of Deacon, and you think that he could be, you know, the biggest name in your production team, you know,
or like an Emmanuel Lubezki.
Right,
so,
exactly.
You know.
They could be the biggest name because they have such massive skill and passion that the work of the product is perfect, and you'll find yourself not wanting to take out any darling because the skill is top notch.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important that, you know, when we discuss time being seen as skill and passion, you know, when you can get excellent team members, darlings become, you know, they may not even exist.
Yeah. You know, and that goes to anyone involved in the production process, because they've been in the trenches with you, you know, and they signed on to this thing because they're skillful and they're passionate about it as well. And to be able to surround yourself with a team of individuals that are, you know, that carry those two traits is important. Now, someone that kind of falls outside of that, and we brought them up, as an executive producer, right? Like, I feel like whenever you say that as an indie filmmaker or and you say rely on your executive producers, it's almost like, what are you talking about? You know, like they're vampires, blood, you know, sucking the lifeblood out of your creative work because they're just thinking about the finances. But no, like if you can look at it for a second from the perspective of these individuals that donated, whether they are funders or they are donors or they have an actual financial stake in what you're creating, the reason why they did it in the first place is because they believed. They saw something, you know, and they believed in the product, and they were like, I believe in what you're doing, and I'm going to put my means, you know, like the Bible says, some send, some go. They're sending you to go to do the work, right? Because they believe in it. And it's good to check back with those individuals, and, you know, and you know, if you're an artist and you're not touring, they're like, they're gonna kill the art. No, they're not, because they themselves may not be able to physically do the work that you do, the technical art, but they're appreciators of art, you know, and because they're appreciators of art, just like any audience, an audience member may not be able to tell you precisely how to execute your film, but they can tell you why they didn't like it, why something didn't work, why it stunk. They might not be able to give you the intricacies of why, but they can tell you how it made them feel. And if you can talk to an executive producer about, well, how does this make you feel? Because you're invested in this, you're putting your finances into this, you might be able to have some great conversations that lead to the killing of darlings. So they're not just, you know, vampires sucking the life force out of your film. They're passionate individuals that are also putting a piece of themselves into it.
You don't understand when someone gives their money, that is a major form of approval.
Yeah, it's a contribution. It's approval.
It's like, I want to be on board that I'm giving you a piece of me. And that alone should excite you that someone has joined your team. So he wants the success again as much as you do.
Absolutely. All right, on to our next topic. Deleted scenes are often killed darlings, are they not?
So there's hundreds of them. Everyone's got deleted scenes.
Now, some of the ones that we're going to be referencing, we're going to put it in the show notes because we pulled some stuff from a YouTube video that we saw, the greatest deleted scenes ever filmed. We'll put the title for it on there, but we're going to talk about two specific scenes and two specific moments of scenes that were deleted that were phenomenal, fantastic, and amazing, but for some reason the director or the editor or someone along the process chopped it off because they thought, this is a darling. The first one that we're going to talk about is James Cameron's Terminator 2, Judgment Day. You know, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. You know, the one that made the franchise it is today.
Absolutely.
I think that was like 1991.
Yes.
Now, in that film, there's a line, we always joke about it, I don't know if you like. I always do it in the Arnold voice. Whenever we're talking about like machines taking over, I always say it is a neural net processor, a learning computer,
learning computer.
So let's talk about that line for a second, because that line was put into the film and it was kept in the film. But something that audiences don't know is that there was a deleted scene specifically connected to the fact that it is that Arnold, or that the Terminator, is a learning computer. Now in the movie, in Terminator 2, you've got these robots that are coming from the future in order to come into the past to kill and destroy the John Connor, who is going to be a freedom fighter who is going to stop the apocalypse. But machines take over because of technology, and it's that same story, and it's that time travel story. And what ends up happening is that the character of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, comes back to protect John Connor from the T-1000, from the liquid guy. I don't know what the number. I think Arnold was a T-1000, or was the liquid one the T-1000? I don't know. That's a trivia question.
Yeah, I'm sure that hundreds of people know.
I know.
We are struggling.
What are you messing this up for?
Yeah.
So now in the scene, there's a scene that James Cameron cut out where John and Sarah Connor are actually going into the brain, into the cortex, the chip of Arnold, and they're messing with it and they're reprogramming it so that he can learn emotions.
Right.
And therefore, that line of "I am a neural net processor learning computer," it's interesting in the story how that works out. But they were going to go in to make sure that they could change him so that he could become more and more and more
understanding.
Human. Yeah, and the idea was that scene would finally pay off at the end when he makes the ultimate sacrifice.
Right.
Where it's that thumbs up moment, the and he's like, wow, he made an empathetic choice of sacrificing his life in order to save John Connor.
Right.
And he learned. But James Cameron took that scene out.
Right.
He cut that scene out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And in this video, it actually doesn't really say why. In my opinion, I could totally see why he cut the scene out.
Why?
When you're trying to have an audience connect with a robot, you can't have the actors alter him.
Yeah, the human characters alter the robot.
Exactly. The robot has to have the ability to learn and slowly adapt to understand the human
condition
mind.
In the mind. Yeah.
If the humans were to alter it, it would have been because the humans did it. So that technology wouldn't have been as advanced.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't have been as emotional.
And it wouldn't have been as, it was his heart.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. It was almost like a miracle.
Exactly.
By removing that scene, I love it. I think you're so spot on. Because by removing that scene, it was not the manipulation of the humans. It was some sort of miraculous growth within this metallic heart.
Right.
It's the Tin Man story.
Yeah.
He has this heart that has grown, this consciousness that has awoken, this miracle that has happened in his neural net processor where he has learned to become human, and you connect and you're like, yes, the Terminator is human.
Exactly. And the moment now if you think about it, the moment he goes down that lava pit and his thumb is up, that's his way of showing love.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know how. So he's developed this knowledge of sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's what love is, by his own merit.
Interesting.
But if you would have taken it away of his own merit, if they would have done it themselves.
Yeah, it would have been a manipulation, and I don't think the audience would have connected with the Terminator as much, and that end scene wouldn't have paid off. Which is interesting because I think that this video is arguing for the opposite, that it's such a phenomenal scene that it should have been left in, but I think James Cameron, based on your theory, made the right choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I believe the movie was so successful, because you see him at the end sacrificing himself. He did it.
That's awesome, man.
He did it. I love Arnold because of it. I love this character because of it.
Yeah.
And I want to see more. Whereas they altered him, it was because of what they did. So I wouldn't have connected.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Let's skip to one of our films. In Armor of God.
Yeah.
In Armor of God, there was a chase scene that was deleted.
Oh yeah.
From the final film. The chase scene was highlighting the backstory for why the protagonist has a new partner, and and why does this new partner need to be shown the ropes, because it was all going to culminate in their meeting of John Ropes. Interesting. And it was a dynamic opening. It got the people, it just kind of dropped the people in the moment of like a really epic action. It's the death of a young kid. It's this chase of this kid, and this partner is killed, and it's a lot that is happening, and you're visually engaged, and you're immediately dropped into action, and then the story kind of begins. But we cut it. We cut that chase scene out. You want to talk a little bit about why that darling was removed?
I want you, because I think that you were on the edit on this one.
Yeah.
And this was something that struck you personally, that you perceived. So
all right, fair enough. So,
because I want you to iterate it better than I would.
No, I hear you. And okay, so when we were watching, it was almost like an action sequence for the sake of action. And you're watching it and you're like, does it need this? Because the story didn't really even begin until after all of that. And it was almost like, here's a whole bunch of cool action, and now that action is over, like, cool, did we catch you? Did we trick you into watching our movie? Now here's the movie. And we felt like it was cheapening the experience.
Now, for you as an editor, how were you able to see that?
I hated it. I hated every second of it. Because I remember directing it, and I thought this was the best part to direct.
And it's fun.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
I hated every second of it. And I don't even know what led me to that decision, because I don't remember. I think it was more of like just kind of like a moment of clarity.
Was it constantly editing it that made you see it, or was it something in the story that just popped out?
I think at the end of the day, I realized that I was trying to trick the audience into watching the movie. That it was like, hey, look at us, like we can do action
and
too.
If you can spot that, the viewer can spot that easily.
Super easy.
Yeah,
you can't.
Far easier than you would.
Oh yeah, you can't fool the audience on something like that. The audience is gonna immediately call you out on that kind of stuff. And I spotted it, and it was one of those things where I was trying to hide. I was like kind of pushing down, and subconsciously, and I think you said this in one of the episodes. It's like you know if it's a darling. It's in the back of your mind now. You're pushing it away, but there's this still small voice whispering, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And you gotta know yourself. You gotta know, you gotta be able to do the hard things of in writing, for example. There are often times where you write a detail when you're 10 pages beyond a darling moment, and you write it, and it awakens you to the past, and you're like, oh, I gotta go back and I gotta remove that, but I gotta undo so much. I gotta undo so much in order to do it. You can't settle. You can't settle and leave the bad for the sake of that.
Right. One thing that you don't want to do is show your darling to an encourager. A person who looks at your stuff and always says, "Oh man, that's so awesome. You're so awesome. Good.
Everything's good."
Do not do that.
And we do that. We do that because we show it. We subconsciously show it to people that are going to take our side. To scratch the ego. Scratch that itch. We do that. We're like, oh, I know so and so loves everything that we do. No, let's just show them.
One of the. We're surrounded by both. We have people who are encouragers, which is awesome because it gets you motivated, keeps you going. And then there's those who will tell it to you straight on.
Larry Devlin.
And yes, and
he's the perfect. He's the perfect soundboard. He'll just tell you straight. He goes, "I hate it."
and I love it. I love that.
You need those people.
You have those people because they'll hit you. They won't waste your time. They won't wait. And your time will not be wasted. Again, time is money. And it's the same thing we talked about. Time is so important, and so you get right to the point. Yeah.
So I'll throw in a really quick example. I'm going to throw a theater example, just a quick one because we've done a ton of theater, and a ton of main stage productions. And after something that uniquely that happens after like preview night, when before your audience comes in. It's like it's a night where you have audiences in. It's usually discounted tickets or it's free, and you bring in an audience in order to test your show to see is that come together the way that as the director and the stage manager are viewing it. What happens is that the audience has a collective experience with what's happening live on stage, and you, whether you're the director or the stage manager, you're sitting in the audience and you're experiencing what they're experiencing, and you can gain and glean into how they are receiving what you're receiving. Are they laughing when they're supposed to laugh? Are they crying when they're supposed to cry? Are they interacting the way that you're expecting them to interact? And after preview night, a lot of things happen. There are often times where shows are changed, blocking, lines of dialogue are changed all the way through the entire run. And that is spotting darlings. There may be time, and it's unique and it's different with theater because it's live. You're changing live things. I've
been practicing this thing for months.
Yeah, it's like this actor has memorized his lines for like 3 months one way, and then you're like, after a preview night, you're like, yeah, we're going to change all this. This is how you're going to do it now. Like, that's hard too. Yeah. But like, that's the beauty of theater. There's the unique challenges that come with a theatrical production that make the process of making story on stage so exciting. Yeah. So exciting. And I just wanted to bring that up because their darlings are created in theater just like in any other means of storytelling, whether it's songwriting, and you're a lyricist and you just fall in love with specific lyrics because they pertain to you in a specific way, but they don't necessarily ring true to the collective, audience. You got to be able to know to step back and say, okay, this word choice, what word can I use to articulate better what we're all experiencing versus like what I'm feeling. And those are important self-awarenesses that you need to have.
Yeah. There are some songs out there that I was like, oh, these lyrics sound so cool, but what do they mean? Yeah. And so what are they saying?
Yeah. And that's why some of the most successful songs are the ones where like everyone for some reason just like can relate because the songwriter, the lyricist did a job of like shaving off and being very specific about
this means that. And it's so poetic, and it's like, wow. Yeah.
So our final topic before we go into the creator's tip of the week, and we can make this one quick. What to do when a darling killing turns into a major disagreement? What do you do when there's a major disagreement, or a war, a shouting match, or some sort of argument? Things like how to solve these things.
It's so common here at Mount Harvest.
Talking to Eric Monzon about some of the impassioned. We like to call them impassioned conversations. Yeah. Creatives that are passionate.
Yes. I like that.
Yes, and have conversations. And you know what? Those are important things. But what is one thing? And we've already touched upon this. We already talked about it. Is strong relationships. Having strong relationships. When you can have a strong relationship with your collaborators and with all of the individuals that are involved in this, then you have a group of individuals that share a same vision. And if you know that everyone shares the vision and it's been well articulated, that's why we talk about creating story Bibles for our films. It's rare. Some people call it overkill. Most people probably think it's overkill. I may even tend to agree with them, but one thing that we have found in our own personal and our own unique process is that in so creating story Bibles for films, not just shows but films, not TV series but films, is that we're able to articulate and clearly speak with every single person, whether it's a PA or a DP, the same vision. And everybody can read it, this long document, and everybody can see, this is the end goal. And when you have that kind of confidence that everybody's on the same page, then when someone disagrees with you, then you know that they're disagreeing with you, not because for the sake of disagreeing with you, but because they are on the same vision path, but they have a different and unique perspective, and you've got to check yourself and hear them out. You got to hear them out.
Yeah. And then you have the opposite end. You think about the scripture, pride comes before the fall. That's what's going to happen if your ego and the pride is good nowhere.
Yeah, you got to recognize your ego.
And so you're like, this is the shot, and I want to put it in because I thought of it, and it's creative. And it needs to be there because you think it says the scene and they're clearly seeing something that you're not, or vice versa, or they're both arguing with ego. No, because you want it in, not because it's working. It should never be like a sword fight. It should always be a sit down conversation, dialogue, a peace treaty. You know, it should be a session of finding, going back to the beginning.
Yeah.
That's something that you and I do. I know that when we were like, this color grade's no good. Oh, I love this color grade. Why? And, something's not working. What's not working? I don't know what it is. We go back to the beginning, and we assess what we looked at the lookbook. Yeah. We break
got
down.
That document that
we
grounds
go exactly
your baseline.
Sometimes you'll find that your darlings will take you from the beginning to the middle to the end. It'll bounce you everywhere to make your decision. Yeah. You know, to make your decision on whether it works or doesn't. So you go back to the pre-production, research development. What did you guys discuss? What did you find? What did you read? Oh, that's why we did this. This is why we did that. Okay, so did we end up going into the film production phase and do it? Did we execute? Was it done well? Yeah. No, because, you know, this Kodak was recorded in this color, and, you know, we weren't able to bring in the. Okay, so now what are we stuck with? This is why it's not working, right? Because of, you know, the rabbit hole or the breadcrumbs that we've laid in the back, and we're noticing. So a lot of times the way that you squash those passionate discussions is going back to the beginning and breaking down all the research, going through production, if it's production that helped you, or, you know, the beginning of the movie and watching it over and over again until you guys see what's important.
Yeah, you said, you know, check your ego, and at the end of the day, I think it's like know thyself. You're like, know yourself. Know yourself. Look, you're a professional, and constantly you need to work on yourself, whether it's working on your listening skills, working on your patience, working on knowing knowing yourself, like knowing when you're attached to something purely because it's emotional, or is it actually truly creative storytelling. Know yourself. You got to know yourself. Nobody wants to work with a jerk, you know? And so if you're going to bring your ego into the process and you're not going to be willing or able to check yourself, then it's just like, no one's going to want to work with you.
Right.
No one's going to want to work with you. And so you can be passionate, absolutely, and you can stand firm for your passionate idea and opinions. And if you feel like your opinions are true and you can justify them, and you can follow through and explain why, then it's okay to, you know, to push a little, because that's how great story is created, you know, throughout the synergy of two ideas coming together and being created into one greater idea. That's why we go.
That's in the world of, I think, independent films. But when you start moving up and you start working with, your ideas, have probably already even been thought of.
Yeah.
Because there's a massive team of individuals.
There's usually a huge machine in studio films. Yeah. But even in there, you know, like there is conflict. Yeah. There is conflict, and I think conflict, you know, when it is channeled through a team that has the same vision, it always ends up in the end becoming something that creates a better product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most
you just don't want to be found the guy saying something and then, you know,
you don't want to be the Christian Bale screaming at Shane Holbert.
Poor guy. Yeah.
You don't want to be that guy. Yeah, like it just doesn't. Nobody wants, you know. And unfortunately, Christian Bale is superstar, so he'll never feel the repercussions of being that guy. But you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Shane Holbert is a sweetheart.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. So, on to Creators Tip of the Week, because this is a long episode, and it's our last episode. Yeah. So I think we owed it to the audience to go.
We're trying to kill these things. So,
what's your Creators Tip of the Week?
All right. So, I think since we're at the end, one of the things that you think about is when you start building your team, you start growing, and you're big. You have to think about your credits.
Yeah, credits, rolling credits.
A lot of times, I know that we've dealt with this. You know, when you start editing and doing your credits, you get all this jittering, or their texts are separating from each other.
Yeah, you see that all the time.
It's not as easy as you think it is.
Yeah.
You know,
especially if you're trying to do it in like Premiere, or you're trying to do it in Final Cut, or you're trying to do it in that program. Like, sometimes you're trying to time it and you're watching it, so like, you know, you've got one credit going and the other one's like, it's catching up.
That's just text. What is going on? So, so there's awesome software. There's actually a website, Encrawl, and, you know, it helps you with that.
Cool.
It's like it says on their website, buttery smooth. And
smooth.
yeah, and it handles all those situations. It's this web database that kind of just takes your information, plugs it in, pops it into your movies, and it's right then and there. You just transfer it.
Is it an aggregate? Like, does it help collect your information? So, like, is it something kind of like Studio Binder, where along the way you can plug in names and then it organizes it for you?
So exactly. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
So yeah, you plug it in and it organizes it for you, and you can.
Is it an app or is it a program?
So it's a website app.
Okay.
Check it out. I think it's Encrawl.
Encrawl.
I thought I said that.
Encrawl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
all right,
check
cool.
it out. There's more information there, more than I could ever give you. But it's a really cool feature.
It'll be in the show notes.
That takes that headache away.
Yeah. Buttery smooth.
Buttery smooth is what they say.
Nice. I like buttery smooth because I have seen some jittery, jumpy, catchy-uppy credits in my days.
So, like, what do I do?
All right, cool. So my creator's tip of the week is actually I've been listening to. I'm in love with the Team Deacons podcast. Man,
cool.
It is powerful. And they were talking. One of the podcasts in there was talking about something that I was just like, this is such a cool resource. People need to know about this. So I'm going to plug it in. It's called the Criterion Channel. The Criterion Channel is it's an app, but it's also a website. And the Criterion Group is a team of restoration artists. They restore old films. So, like, for example, I think the first film ever was Seven Samurais. And they took the digital negatives of Seven Samurais and they remastered it, recolored it, and re-released it in 4K for Blu-ray. And oftentimes, like, these films, for example, over the course of time, they become deteriorated, they become damaged, and they need to get restored. That's why now we're seeing the resurgence of a lot of remastered films from the 60s and the 70s, even from the 50s and beyond. Well, Criterion Channel, what they do is they remaster these. So, like, for example, Lawrence of Arabia, that film is a beautiful film. What's happened over the course of time is that the film stock for that has faded, the color has faded, and this group, they restored it, remastered it, recolored it, and released it for the audience to view. Now, the Criterion Channel is a database of cinema's greatest classic
that's awesome.
remastered films, all beautiful, originally intended how the directors wanted to want them viewed, remastered with beautiful sound for today's 4K audience.
Oh, what a gold mine. That's awesome.
You could actually see all of Scorsese's short films on there. Did you know that Scorsese? I didn't even know Scorsese had like 8 to 10 short films that are remastered in not even HD, 4K. Some of them are HD, some of them are 4K, and it's an entire database of these classics. Can you imagine, like, you have at your fingertip the ability to film study any great film in the history. It's amazing. And so these guys, that's their job. That's what they do. They remaster these films, and they work with the directors, or they'll work with the studio houses, and they'll remaster them. And either you can buy the DVD and the Blu-ray separately, if you're a collector, or you can log in and become a member on the Criterion Channel, which is similar to like Netflix. It's a membership fee, and you pay in, and you have access to all of these historical, phenomenal films. And some of them are newer too. They also have newer films on there, so it's not just old 40s and 50s and silent era films. Cool. It's also stuff that's relatively recent.
So is this a free? Is this subscription?
So it's subscription. The Criterion Channel itself is subscription based. So you can either get a subscription to the channel and have access to a bunch of content, but you don't own it, or you can buy the DVDs or Blu-rays directly of specific films that you want to watch.
Oh, that's amazing.
So so you can, it's either or. But you can watch the trailers to all of them, remastered trailers, in case you're interested. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to have that,
awesome.
Especially for DPs.
With that one.
Yeah, like being able to watch these 70mm films that were first created.
Amazing.
Cool. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so very much for enduring this 3-part Killing Your Darlings series. I was really excited to be able to.
I think
put
it
that
was
together.
so important. I think that that's what makes or breaks a movie. Being able to, assess and make hard choices for bettering your product.
Yeah, absolutely. Next week, I want to tease it. Next week, we're gonna have a special guest.
Oh, cool!
The brilliant. Should we give it out? Should we just say? I don't know. What do you think?
I think we should say his talents.
All right. Well, we're gonna talk music.
Yeah.
We're going to talk music next week. We're going to talk about the power of music and sound for your film.
Yeah.
And we're going to be joined by a very special guest who's going to walk us through his process.
Yep.
We're going to talk about, the marrying and the merging of cinema, of the visual component of cinema with the audio component of cinema, and the story that sound tells.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
Very skilled, industry professional. Yep.
All right, well, thank you for joining The Harvest. The Harvest's producer is Alana Despena. You can find all of our show notes on the patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast, as well as the Harvest channel on YouTube. For any short questions, you can reach me on Twitter at xgarcia.
And I'm at Jonathan Harvest.
And for any long questions that you may have, any questions at all, we would love to be able to answer them, whether it's on the show or directly to you via email. You can write to us at info@mountharvest.com. There is no such thing as a dumb question. Feel free. Shoot us an email, info@mountharvest.com. Thank you guys so very much. And until next week.
Yes, please like, share, and subscribe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us at thepatreon.com/The Harvest Podcast for some BTS footage of our cinema production life.